Have you ever spent 5 years building $100 million empire only to be pushed out by a hollow suit? Don't get mad. The magic of revenge isn't in how loud you scream. It is in the dead silence when you walk away, taking the only key that starts their money-making machine. This is how I turned a severance package into a corporate death sentence. Legal, cold, and irreversible. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. I want to speak to you honestly for a moment. YouTube has unfortunately disabled monetization on our channel, leaving us completely without an operating budget to keep bringing you these videos. If you find today's story satisfying and want to help us out, please consider joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon to hear exclusive, true, and even more incredible stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube, featuring multiple emotional voice actors bringing every scene to life. You can join our community right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link down in the video description or the pinned comment of this video. Now let us dive into today's story of corporate betrayal and absolute payback, told from the perspective of our protagonist, Sydney Lopez. I am 32 years old, and until recently, I was the Chief Operating Officer of Ethelgard Logistics, right here in the freezing, wind-whipped heart of Chicago. We were not just moving boxes. Ethelgard specialized in the lifeblood of the elite, managing the intricate supply chains, international freight, and Byzantine customs clearances for global luxury brands. If an Italian fashion house needed 2,000 pure silk scarves delivered to their Manhattan flagship by Tuesday morning, or a Swiss manufacturer needed a highly secure, temperature-controlled route for 500 diamond-encrusted watches, they called us. It was a high-stakes game of absolute precision, where a single missing digit on a federal import manifest could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines or leave cargo rotting in a port for months. But Ethelgard did not start with slick marketing or mahogany boardrooms. It started in a windowless, unheated, subleased garage with exactly 5 people and a mountain of impossible deadlines. Those early days were a blur of pure, unadulterated grit. I spent countless nights sleeping under my particle board desk, using my winter coat as a blanket. While the rest of the world slept, I was awake, my eyes burning from the glare of dual monitors as I manually wrote the foundational routing code for our delivery network. I lived on burnt, $1 coffee from the gas station across the street and stale bagels. I was the one screaming over the phone at freight managers at 3 in the morning, negotiating shipping rates down to the absolute penny, and tracking weather systems over the Atlantic just to ensure our cargo planes beat the storms. Every single successful delivery, every impossible deadline met, was built on the back of my sheer willpower and refusal to fail. I memorized global trade compliance laws like they were religious texts. I knew the exact temperament of the port directors in Los Angeles, New York, and Miami. I built the entire operational infrastructure from absolute scratch. Through it all, Marcus, our chief executive officer and supposed visionary, was right there cheering me on. Back then, he wore the same wrinkled button-down shirt for 3 days straight, just like the rest of us. He used to bring me fresh coffee, look me dead in the eye, and say, "Sydney, you are the iron heart of Ethelgard. I could not do this without you." He painted a beautiful picture of our future. He promised me that when we finally hit the big leagues, when we took this scrappy little company public, we would share the equity down the middle. We were partners in the trenches, or so I believed. I poured every ounce of my youth, my energy, and my sanity into building his dream, assuming that my sweat equity was an ironclad contract. And the brutal work paid off. Ethelgard did not just grow, it exploded. Within 4 years, we moved out of the garage and secured a breathtaking top-floor suite in a downtown high-rise. Suddenly, our world was all floor-to-ceiling glass walls, imported espresso machines, and designer ergonomic chairs. We were handling billions in cargo value annually. Our valuation skyrocketed, and the industry press started calling Ethelgard the next unicorn of the logistics world. But as the company transformed, so did Marcus. The wrinkled shirts were replaced by custom-tailored Italian suits that cost more than my first car. The late-night brainstorming sessions over cheap pizza vanished, replaced by expensive power lunches at five-star restaurants where he claimed he was building strategic synergy. More importantly, I began to notice a shift in the corporate gravity. Instead of calling me into his office to solve massive logistical puzzles, Marcus started hosting closed-door meetings with venture capitalists and high-profile investors. And I was not invited. I would walk past the glass conference room, seeing him shake hands and clink glasses, while I was left outside holding a stack of maritime shipping manifests. Did it hurt? Of course it did. But I pushed the resentment down. I told myself that Marcus was just playing the corporate game, doing the superficial networking required to secure our next round of funding. I retreated back to my desk and kept grinding, burying myself in the complex web of international tariff codes and port authority regulations. I managed a team of 50 logistics coordinators, ensuring that not a single ounce of our clients' precious cargo ever faced a delay. I genuinely believed that my silent, relentless dedication was my armor. In an industry that demanded absolute, flawless execution, I thought the person actually keeping the entire multi-million-dollar operation running was untouchable. I reasoned that slick executives could talk all they wanted, but when a shipment of exotic leather goods was stuck in a customs purgatory at 2 a.m, nobody called the investors. They called me. I thought the machine could not possibly run without its iron heart. I was about to learn a very painful lesson about the modern corporate world. The invisible foundation is exactly that. Invisible, and therefore entirely unappreciated by those looking only at the shiny exterior. The illusion of my indispensability shattered on a random Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of routing a highly sensitive, temperature-controlled shipment of truffles from rural France when Marcus called a surprise all-hands meeting in the main glass atrium. He stood at the front, flashing his newly whitened teeth, and next to him stood a woman who looked like she had just stepped out of a high-fashion magazine spread. She wore a pristine, cream-colored tailored suit that had clearly never been within 10 miles of a dusty loading dock, and she emanated a cloud of floral perfume so strong it practically choked the recycled air out of the room. "Team," Marcus announced, his voice oozing with rehearsed corporate charisma. "As Ethelgard scales to new, unprecedented heights, we need to evolve our brand narrative. We are no longer just moving boxes. We are curating global journeys. Therefore, I am thrilled to introduce our new Vice President of Strategic Partner Experience, Chloe." I stared at her, blinking in absolute disbelief. I knew that name. A junior coordinator standing next to me whispered that Chloe was a former lifestyle influencer who got famous for reviewing organic matcha lattes and aesthetically pleasing yoga retreats in Bali. She had absolutely zero background in supply chain management, freight forwarding, maritime law, or customs compliance. Yet here she was, blowing kisses and flashing peace signs to a room full of hardened logistics veterans who worked 80-hour weeks. 30 minutes later, I was summoned to Marcus's corner office. He offered me a bottle of imported sparkling water, actively refusing to meet my eyes. "Sydney," he started, using that soft, patronizing tone that executives use when they are about to execute a corporate assassination. "You have been incredible, truly, but we are restructuring for global reach. We need someone with a massive online presence to interface directly with the creative directors of these luxury fashion houses. Chloe speaks their language. She has the aesthetic vision we need to secure our Series C fundraising round." I felt a cold, heavy knot form in my stomach. "Marcus, this industry is not about aesthetic vision. It is about federal compliance, calculating fuel surcharges, and surviving international port strikes. What exactly is her role going to be?" He smiled a tight, uncomfortable smile. "She will be taking over the daily operations of the partner pipeline. Now do not worry. You are not going anywhere. We are transitioning you to a newly created role, Senior Advisor. Your compensation will remain exactly the same, but your primary duty will be to mentor Chloe. Show her the ropes, support her vision. Senior Advisor. It was the classic modern corporate death sentence. It meant I was being stripped of my authority, locked in a gilded cage, and forced to hand over the keys to the kingdom to a glittering usurper who probably did not know the difference between a commercial bill of lading and a brunch menu. Within 48 hours, Chloe began dismantling years of highly optimized operational protocols in the name of what she called aesthetic synergy. Her first major executive order was overhauling our secondary packaging. For years, we had used reinforced, weather-resistant, charcoal gray poly mailers to protect luxury goods from the filth of cargo holds and rain-swept tarmacs. Chloe found them too aggressive and uninviting. She mandated a complete, immediate switch to bespoke, matte pastel pink packaging. I tried to explain that these boxes would be handled by forklift drivers with heavy grease on their gloves and tossed onto dirty industrial conveyor belts in Newark. I warned her that a pristine pastel pink box would look like it had been dragged through a mud pit by the time it reached a high-end client in London. She simply waved her manicured hand and told me that the color pink promoted emotional wellness and softness during the unboxing experience. But the packaging disaster was nothing compared to her approach to federal documentation. International shipping requires cold, hard facts. The United States Customs and Border Protection Agency does not care about your feelings. They care about harmonized system codes, precise weight measurements, and accurate declared financial values. Chloe, however, decided that our commercial invoices sounded too sterile and corporate. She issued a sweeping directive to the documentation team, demanding that we use mindful, healing language in our customs declarations. Instead of describing a shipment as 500 units of processed cowhide leather goods, she wanted it listed as a curated collection of earth-derived, sustainable wearable art pieces designed to nurture the human spirit. I practically kicked down her office door when I saw that memo. "Chloe," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "if you submit a federal import declaration with this kind of vague, poetic language, the customs agents will not feel nurtured. They will flag the shipment for suspected smuggling, seize the cargo immediately, and fine us $10,000 per infraction. You cannot rebrand federal laws." She looked up from her elaborate dual ring light setup, where she was apparently filming a day in the life vlog for her followers. She gave me a deeply patronizing, sympathetic smile. "Sydney, I hear your anxiety. I really do. But you are letting an outdated mindset hold back your creativity. The modern consumer wants a story, not a spreadsheet. We need to disrupt the old ways. Trust the process." I was not dealing with a colleague. I was dealing with a walking, talking vision board who was about to drive a $100 million freight train straight off a cliff. I tried to swallow my pride. I went back to my desk and spent the next 3 days manually auditing her changes, quietly fixing the customs codes behind her back just to keep the company functioning and out of federal court. That very same week, after 6 months of grueling, late-night negotiations, I finally closed a massive contract with a legendary Swiss watchmaker. It was a 3-year, $20 million exclusive logistics deal. It was the biggest financial win in Ethelgard's history, secured entirely by my operational track record and my personal guarantee of airtight security protocols. On Friday afternoon, my inbox chimed. It was a company-wide email from Marcus, blasted to all 300 employees. The subject line read, "A new era of luxury, celebrating our Swiss partnership." I opened it, expecting at least a brief acknowledgement of the countless hours I spent securing the deal. Instead, the email was a glowing 5-paragraph love letter to Chloe. Marcus credited the entire $20 million victory to Chloe's revolutionary pastel packaging initiative and her unmatched ability to connect with the emotional core of luxury brands. My name was not mentioned a single time. Not once. I sat there in the hum of the open plan office, staring at the glowing screen. I looked across the room and saw Chloe taking a selfie with a celebratory glass of champagne, while Marcus patted her on the back. They were celebrating a victory they did not earn, standing on a foundation they did not understand. They thought I was just a bitter, outdated worker bee who had been successfully pushed aside. They thought I would just sit there, collect my paycheck, and quietly fade into the background. They were wrong. Very, very wrong. Instead of storming into Marcus's office, overturning desks, or screaming about the gross injustice of that company-wide email, I did something far more dangerous. I smiled. I replied all to the email thread with a perfectly polite congratulatory message, complimenting Chloe on her creative vision. Then, I quietly packed up my bag, walked to my car, and drove home to my apartment. The anger that had been simmering inside me evaporated, replaced by a cold, surgical clarity. I did not need validation anymore. I needed leverage, and I knew exactly where to find it. That night, the only light in my living room came from the small desk lamp illuminating the heavy steel door of my personal wall safe. I spun the dial, feeling the satisfying clack of the tumblers falling into place, and pulled out a thick, dust-covered manila envelope. These were the archaic, foundational documents of Ethelgard Logistics, dating back to the garage days, long before we had a polished legal department or a finalized corporate entity structure. I spread the papers across my dining table, tracing the faded ink of our earliest contracts. I was looking for a specific memory, a desperate maneuver we had pulled off exactly 4 years ago when the company was flat broke and teetering on the absolute edge of bankruptcy. Back then, our corporate credit was completely non-existent. We could not even get a loan to buy a used forklift, let alone secure the massive federal bonds required to legally operate as an international freight forwarder. So to keep the dream alive, I had made a massive personal sacrifice. I dug through the pile until I found the original, government-stamped certificates. There it was. The Federal Customs broker license and the primary freight routing cybersecurity keys were not registered to Ethelgard Logistics Incorporated. They were registered directly to my personal Social Security number, backed by my own individual surety bond. I sat back in my chair, the magnitude of the discovery washing over me like a tidal wave. In the chaotic rush of our explosive growth, amidst the endless rounds of venture capital funding and office upgrades, the legal team had completely forgotten to transfer the core operational licenses from my name to the corporate entity. The sleek, multi-million-dollar proprietary software system that Ethelgard currently used every single second of the day was nothing more than a glittering, empty shell. It was blindly routing thousands of API calls through a digital backdoor that borrowed authority directly from my personal federal credentials. If I were to theoretically withdraw my personal surety bond and revoke that digital access, Ethelgard would instantly cease to exist as a legally recognized logistics entity. Every single shipping container, every cargo plane, and every temperature-controlled truck currently in transit under our manifest would hit an invisible brick wall at the United States border. The system would lock them out, and the federal government would freeze the assets. The realization was intoxicating. I held the absolute life-or-death switch for Marcus's entire empire right in the palm of my hand. A good employee, a loyal senior advisor, would have marched into the Human Resources Department the next morning, pointed out the massive compliance oversight, and helped them transition the licenses to the company name. But I was no longer a loyal employee. I was a ghost preparing to haunt them. Over the next 48 hours, I did not say a word to anyone. Instead, I quietly contacted an independent regulatory attorney. Operating entirely outside of the company network, I initiated the complex legal paperwork required to officially separate my personal liability from Ethelgard operations. To ensure the trap was perfectly sprung, I accessed the deepest back-end architecture of our routing software. I did not just turn the system off. That would have triggered immediate alarms. Instead, I installed a dead man's switch. I fundamentally rewrote the authentication protocol, setting up an automatic, irreversible network disconnect. The system would continue to run smoothly, perfectly masking the danger, but it now required my physical biometric authentication to renew the federal security handshake. If I did not scan my fingerprint on the secure master server within exactly 14 days, my personal credentials would automatically detach. The shell would crack, and the entire logistical grid would go dark. With the invisible timer silently ticking down in the background, I logged into the employee portal and submitted a request for 4 weeks of accumulated paid time off, citing severe professional burnout. Marcus, likely thrilled to have my lingering, depressing presence out of his shiny new office, approved it within 10 minutes. I spent my final afternoon meticulously stripping my workspace. I did not throw things in a box. I performed a clinical sanitization. I shredded every handwritten note, deleted every personal macro from my desktop, and quietly slipped every single printed procedural manual into the industrial recycling bin. When I finally walked out of those glass doors on Friday evening, I left absolutely nothing behind but a spotless desk and a beautifully orchestrated catastrophe waiting to happen. While I was breathing in the crisp, pine-scented air of the Blue Ridge Mountains, 300 miles away from the nearest cell phone tower, the magnificent disaster I had engineered was beginning to unfold. My rental was a tiny, rustic cabin at the end of a dirt road, utterly devoid of wireless internet, cable television, or any connection to the modern corporate world. I spent my mornings chopping firewood, my afternoons reading paperback novels on the porch, and my evenings sipping a highly robust red wine. I had powered down my company laptop, removed the battery from my work phone, and shoved them both into the bottom of my duffel bag. It was the most profound peace I had experienced in 5 years. Back in Chicago, Chloe was confidently taking the wheel of the runaway train, completely oblivious to the fact that the tracks had already ended. According to the later testimonies of my former colleagues, she kicked off her reign by throwing a massive, catered public relations event in the main lobby. She called it the launch of our new interface. They hired a local disc jockey, set up pastel pink lighting arrays, and served artisanal cocktails to minor industry bloggers. While Chloe was busy posing for photographs in front of a step-and-repeat banner, a critical automated alert flashed silently on the master logistics dashboard. The routine, 72-hour federal transport declarations for our high-value transatlantic freight were expiring. In my era, renewing those declarations was a deeply ingrained daily habit, a sacred ritual performed before the first cup of morning coffee. Chloe, busy explaining her vision of synergistic freight to a camera crew, simply ignored the flashing red notification. She likely assumed it was just a pesky software update. The first real crack in the foundation appeared less than 48 hours later. 2 heavily armored transport trucks, carrying the first major installment of the $20 million Swiss watch contract I had secured, rolled up to the customs checkpoint at John F. Kennedy International Airport. The drivers handed over their digital manifests, fully expecting the usual seamless clearance. Instead, the federal scanning system rejected the paperwork instantly. The customs identification codes did not match the newly expired registry. The Port Authority did what they always do when dealing with anomalous high-value cargo. They ordered the trucks to pull over into the impound lane, confiscated the keys from the drivers, and placed the entire shipment under armed federal quarantine. When the frantic call from the transport union reached the Chicago office, Chloe was sitting in her glass-walled suite, picking out new ergonomic furniture. Her response to the crisis will forever be etched in the halls of corporate absurdity. The junior coordinator who took the call rushed into her office, pale and shaking, explaining that United States Customs had seized a multi-million-dollar shipment and they were demanding immediate legal rectification. Chloe did not even look up from her fabric swatches. "Oh, that sounds frustrating for them," she sighed, waving a manicured hand. "Just have customer service draft a polite apology email. Tell the customs officers we are experiencing a transitional delay and offer them a 20% off voucher for their next personal shipping order." That usually calms people down. The coordinator stared at her, horrified, trying to explain that you cannot offer a discount coupon to a heavily armed federal agency. The United States government does not care about apology emails. They care about strict compliance. Within hours, the enraged Swiss clients were lighting up the switchboard, screaming about breach of contract and threatening massive lawsuits. Marcus, suddenly realizing the gravity of the situation, tore through the office looking for me. He dialed my number 50 times in a row, pacing the floor and shouting at his assistants to track my location. But I was a ghost. I was sitting on a wooden porch, watching a squirrel bury a nut, completely insulated from his panic. With the Swiss clients threatening to pull their $20 million contract and the federal fines multiplying by the hour, Chloe panicked. She realized that positive affirmations and pastel boxes could not release impounded cargo. But instead of doing the logical thing, diving into the original procedural manuals to learn how the customs portal actually worked, her influencer instincts kicked in. She decided to throw money at the problem. She bypassed the internal engineering team and hired an incredibly expensive, flashy external tech consulting firm from Silicon Valley. She paid them an exorbitant emergency retainer, ordering them to hack into the legacy system and forcefully push the clearance codes through the federal portal. It was the most beautiful, catastrophic mistake she could have possibly made. The moment the external consultants tried to inject unauthorized bypass scripts into the mainframe, my dead man switch woke up. The system, fundamentally wired to my personal biometric identity and federal surety bond, instantly recognized the forced entry as a hostile, malicious cyber intrusion. It did exactly what I had programmed it to do in the event of a security breach. It slammed the iron gates shut. At precisely 2 o'clock in the afternoon, every single screen in the Chicago headquarters flickered and went entirely black. A harsh red lock icon appeared on every monitor. The internal security barrier triggered a total network freeze. The entire supply chain encryption locked down tight. Not a single email could be sent. Not a single routing code could be generated. Every truck, every cargo plane, and every shipping container worldwide associated with our manifest was instantly paralyzed. The money-making machine did not just stall, it violently cannibalized itself, shutting down the entire empire to protect the ghost in the machine. The absolute devastation of Ethelgard Logistics did not happen with a whimper. It happened with a catastrophic explosion of federal red tape. While my work phone was sitting dead at the bottom of my duffel bag, the United States Customs and Border Protection Agency officially issued a full-scale red alert against our entire corporate identity. The poetic, mindful declarations that Chloe had proudly submitted were flagged by federal algorithms as a deliberate attempt to obscure smuggling operations. Within 48 hours, more than $40 million worth of high-end luxury merchandise was frozen indefinitely at entry ports across the country. Shipping containers filled with Italian silk were padlocked in New York, and the multi-million-dollar shipment of Swiss watches sat under armed guard at John F. Kennedy International Airport. The federal government did not care about brand narratives. They suspected massive systemic customs fraud. Wall Street reacted with brutal, cold-blooded efficiency. News of the federal blockade and the sudden complete paralysis of our proprietary software leaked to the financial press on Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, our pre-initial public offering valuation did not just drop. It completely vaporized, plunging by more than 75% in less than 24 hours. The wealthy venture capitalists, whom Marcus had been whining and dining for months, instantly panicked, withdrawing their letters of intent and demanding immediate audits. The luxury fashion houses were screaming over the phone, threatening lawsuits that would bankrupt Ethelgard 3 times over. By midnight, Marcus had called an emergency crisis meeting of the board of directors. The top-floor executive boardroom, usually a space of smug celebration, had transformed into a suffocating war room filled with cold sweat and pure terror. The 10 high-priced corporate lawyers Marcus kept on retainer were typing furiously on their laptops, while board members paced the room, shouting over one another as they watched the ruin of their investments unfold in real time. At the center of the storm was Chloe, completely stripped of her influencer confidence. Her pristine cream-colored suit was wrinkled, and her expensive waterproof mascara was running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. She was hyperventilating, weaponizing her tears to save herself from the firing squad. "This is not my fault," she wailed, clutching a silk handkerchief as she looked at Marcus for protection. The entire operation was a setup. The system Sidney Lopez built was prehistoric, and she deliberately filled it with malicious code and hidden digital traps before she abandoned us. She left a ticking cyber weapon in the mainframe specifically designed to crash the network the moment a creative mind tried to optimize it. She is trying to destroy this company out of sheer, petty jealousy because I replaced her. Marcus, desperate for any excuse to deflect blame from his own colossal lack of oversight, eagerly took the bait. He slammed his fist down onto the mahogany conference table so hard that the crystal water glasses rattled. "She is absolutely right," he snarled, his voice cracking with rage as he turned to the chief of our legal team. "Sidney is holding our entire $40 million pipeline hostage. This is textbook extortion. She wanted to punish us for moving forward without her, and she has compromised our national security infrastructure to do it." The lead defense attorney nodded grimly, adjusting his glasses. "We have more than enough circumstantial evidence of corporate sabotage," the lawyer stated, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "We are finalizing a federal criminal lawsuit against Sidney Lopez right now. We are charging her with grand larceny, extortion, and the criminal destruction of corporate property. We will secure an emergency injunction by morning, freeze her personal bank accounts, and have federal agents waiting at her apartment before sunrise." The attorney moved his mouse, his finger hovering directly over the trackpad, ready to hit the button that would electronically file the paperwork and initiate a nationwide hunt for my arrest. That was the exact second the heavy double oak doors of the boardroom clicked open. The frantic shouting died out instantly. The room plunged into a dead, icy silence as every head snapped toward the entrance. I walked into the boardroom, my heels clicking in a slow, rhythmic, hypnotic beat against the polished marble floor. I was wearing a simple, flawlessly tailored black blazer, my hair pulled back neatly. I looked completely refreshed, perfectly calm, and entirely unbothered by the storm around me. I did not look like a corporate saboteur on the run from the law. I looked like a woman who owned the building. I carried absolutely nothing with me except a single thin white envelope held loosely in my right hand, and a quiet, mocking half-smile playing on my lips. "Yeah, you are going to federal prison, Sidney," Marcus screamed, his face flushed a dark, dangerous shade of crimson. He leapt up from his ergonomic leather chair, spittle flying from his lips. "We have the digital footprint. We have the server logs. You locked the network and initiated a massive corporate sabotage." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply walked over to the head of the mahogany table, directly opposite of him, and placed the thin white envelope in front of his lead defense attorney. "Before you hit send on that ridiculous federal injunction," I said, my voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly through the dead silence of the room, "I strongly suggest you read the contents of this envelope out loud to the board of directors." The attorney snatched the envelope, his fingers trembling slightly. He tore it open and pulled out a single sheet of watermarked legal paper. As his eyes scanned the text, the smug, aggressive posture completely evaporated from his body. His face drained of all color, turning a sickly, translucent shade of gray. He swallowed hard, adjusting his glasses as if hoping the words would somehow magically rearrange themselves. "Read it," Marcus barked, his patience entirely gone. "What kind of extortion is she trying to pull?" "It is not extortion, Marcus," the attorney stammered, his voice cracking. "She did not deploy any malicious code. She did not sabotage the network." The lawyer looked up, making eye contact with every single terrified board member in the room. The federal customs broker license and the primary freight routing cybersecurity keys were never registered to Ethelgard Logistics. They are registered under Sydney Lopez as an individual. 4 days ago, she formally withdrew her personal surety bond and revoked the corporate access to her credentials. The system shut down because we no longer have the legal authority to operate. For the past week, we have been moving international freight completely illegally. A collective gasp echoed around the room. The wealthy venture capitalists slumped back in their chairs, realizing the catastrophic truth. Ethelgard was not a victim of a cyber attack. It was a company operating as a multi-million-dollar fraud. But it gets worse, I added, turning my gaze slowly toward Chloe, who was standing frozen against the glass wall. When your brilliant vice president of strategic partner experience decided to bypass standard protocol and hire that flashy tech consulting firm from Silicon Valley to brute force the system, she triggered a mandatory federal fail-safe. Those external consultants operate under strict federal compliance laws. The moment they realized they were being paid to illegally hack a federal customs portal, their system automatically generated and submitted a cyber intrusion report directly to the Department of Homeland Security. The room started to spin for Marcus. He grabbed the edge of the heavy table to steady himself. "What does that mean?" he whispered, all the fight completely drained from his body. "It means," I said, leaning forward slightly, "that the federal government is currently preparing to permanently revoke Ethelgard's corporate charter. You are facing decades in federal prison for orchestrated customs fraud. The only reason the federal agents have not kicked down these glass doors yet is because my personal surety bond is still technically the foundational guarantor on file. I am the only person on this entire planet who can authenticate the system, call the port directors, and verify that the intrusion was an internal misunderstanding rather than a hostile international threat." Marcus collapsed back into his chair. The man who had promised me the world, the visionary who had tried to discard me for a pastel-colored aesthetic, was openly weeping. "Sydney, please," he begged, holding his hands up in total surrender. "Please unlock the servers. We will do anything. Name your price. We will double your salary. We will make you the president of operations." I reached into the pocket of my black blazer and pulled out a heavy physical hardware authentication key on a metal ring. It was the master override. I placed it gently on the polished wood and slid it all the way down the long table. It stopped exactly 1 inch from his folded hands. "I do not want a salary," I said, my voice echoing with absolute, undeniable authority. "I am going to unlock the servers and clear the federal warnings, but the price for my personal license usage rights has just gone up. I require an immediate, legally binding transfer of 40% of total company equity with full voting rights. Furthermore, Chloe is to be terminated right here, right now, in this exact room. She will receive 0 severance pay, absolutely no recommendation, and she will be escorted out of the building by security within the next 5 minutes." Chloe let out a pathetic sob, looking at Marcus for a lifeline. He did not even look at her. He just stared blankly at the metal key. Right on cue, the boardroom doors opened again. My personal regulatory attorney walked in, carrying a thick stack of finalized asset transfer agreements. He distributed them around the table to the trembling board of directors. There was no negotiation. There were no counteroffers. In absolute deafening silence, surrounded by the ruins of their own arrogance, Marcus and the board signed every single page. I picked up my 40% ownership stake, tucked it neatly under my arm, and turned my back on them. I did not wait for a thank you, and I certainly did not need an apology. I simply walked out the glass doors, having legally bought back the very empire they had foolishly tried to steal from me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would absolutely love to know where in the world you are tuning in from today, so please let me know down in the comments. If you found today's story satisfying and want to help support our work, please consider joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon. It is the only way you can hear our absolute best, most intense, and entirely exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again, and I will see you in the next story.